I say that because the investment allowance is available for small business, turnover less than $2 million, at this 50% level, provided that it is a business. And there's some very, very clear rules around the charter boat industry as to what constitutes a business. And that's wrapped up in that ruling of 2003. So in this circumstance where we do have a business, prospect of profit and significant commercial purpose, we can see that at a 40-cent tax rate, you're driving a very significant tax deduction year one of about $130,000, 40 year two, 24 year three, etc. And your comment or question earlier was, can I carry that forward? And the answer is, our understanding is absolutely you can. It is simply a business, and it may be that you can only facilitate 80 of that first 130. It is important also to recognise that even if you are seen as being on the top marginal tax rate, that tax rate only applies to revenues above $180,000. So if you've got a tax loss in this instance being the combination of the $46,000 and the $280,000, then the real arbitrage tax rate that you're going to affect this by won't be 46, because a lot of it will be coming down to the 40% levels and the 30 and the 18% levels. So you need to be mindful of what the real tax effect is on that. The bottom set of numbers are very critical as well, because this is really the cash flow movements. Based on that 80% gearing, there are finance payments which are nearly $80,000 a year on this boat. It's a significant boat. Those finance payments are going to be due and payable monthly, come hell or high water. Your revenue from your charter boat is going to come sporadically. So you're going to see lots of revenue in August, September, October, through the high season of the Whitsundays, but there's going to be minimal revenue sitting around the January, February period when it's quiet. So you need to be very mindful about your cash flow timings and ensure that you've got sufficient coverage and facilities to be able to handle that. So you can see there's a shortfall there between those two numbers of about 32,000, but there is a significant reduction in the tax payable, provided that you've got that circumstance occurring within your economic arrangements. I think it's important, I just need to cover off something fairly conceptual. These numbers on the right-hand side, remembering that this was a 10-year spreadsheet. The $609,000 that we see in this first set of numbers at the top here represent the amount of money that's been paid to interest and principal to fully discharge that 80% of the capital value of the boat in loan over that extended period. The $468,000 is what has been received by the charter boat owner in the net revenue across the board on the revenue streams, and we saw that on the first page with regard to the expense less the incomes. That's leaving a shortfall of $142,000, but you'll see there, especially because of the investment allowance, we've seen a reduction in tax payable of around about $149,000. So we're sitting there at pretty well a break square position. And what does that mean? It means that 80% of the boat has been fully funded and paid down over that period, and that's really been supported by this income producing asset. It's been there working for the whole period, and some timing on some tax issues. And I'll talk about timing later, because tax that is often saved is often later repaid, and we'll go through that. Okay. Having contemplated the purchase of a charter boat, I think it's important to contemplate the end game. Whether you're buying a business, whether you're buying an investment property, at the end of the day you need to understand in totality what you're going to do with your business. And that also contemplates you exiting that business. This set of numbers in the middle here will allow you to see that we've got a boat being sold for about 75% of its original purchase price, as supported by the statistics from Seawind. Having been through 9 years of a business, you've been claiming significant levels of depreciation over that period. So the written down value on the boat at that point in time is $19,000. It is not a capital gain, because it's actually depreciation that you've claimed. So it's a clawback, and it has a tax liability, and that tax liability treats it as assessable income, not as a capital gain. So in a way, if you were retired at the end of your charter boat life, it stands to reason that your taxable revenue for that year would be in excess of $400,000, and you would be taxed at your top marginal rate proportion of that. So it's important to recognise that this is not a capital gain on a property where you might get a 24 cent on the dollar cost. This is revenue in your hands as claimed back on appreciation. So I'm going to go to the bottom numbers for a moment, and then we'll sort of slide back up a little bit to give you further explanation on a couple of areas. What we see here is a surplus of $156,000 as an end game result at the end of 10 years. And that's created by the sale of the boat at $422,000, the repatriation of your initial $112,000 deposit. Now, this spreadsheet doesn't contemplate what the real value of that money is. You've had $110,000 sitting dead in the water. So that might really have a value of 180 or 210 or whatever on a capitalising basis. We know that through the period of the 9 to 10 year charter boat arrangement, it's essentially broken square, small credit of $7,000 in terms of revenue and tax timing versus expense of paying the boat down. And we've also got a $161,000 tax bill generated from the clawback on the depreciation on sale. What I do need to let you know is there is a couple of nuances about this. Firstly, as law currently stands, as we understand it, the sale of the boat is what triggers the clawback on depreciation. We see many operators or charter boat owners have a boat in charter for 7 or 8 years, only to turn it to private use for another 5 or 6 years. Returning to private use by itself doesn't trigger a clawback on depreciation. However, it is always there as a payable circumstance. So if you sold your boat in 5 or 6 years' time after you've had it out of charter, then clearly that clawback on depreciation still stands. It is a relevant tax liability as it is in an investment property that you moved into. The investment period is also something that's going to incur a liability. What is important to note is that as you bought this brand new boat and you've received the GST input credit on the purchase, at the time you do move it from charter use to private use, there is a GST clawback. So the boat at the time of conclusion of its charter life will be independently valued. The value of that will have 1/11 of it go back to the ATO as repatriation on GST for the change in usage from commercial to private. So that's the first outcome to recognise. Secondly, as the law currently stands within the pooling provisions of the simplified tax system, there is an ability to actually transfer the liability from one boat to another. So if I gave you a hypothetical circumstance that had an owner of a boat, some 7 years into a charter life of a boat, decide to upgrade to a larger boat within a charter circumstance, and let's say hypothetically that larger boat was $1 million boat. Provided they do it in the same financial year, they would be selling this boat and they'd be incurring a clawback liability of $400,000 to use a rough number. They do have an opportunity, instead of paying the tax on that $400,000, to simply warehouse that into the replacement boat. It's actually a little more simplified than that in the pooling, but I think conceptually that's the best way to describe it. And therefore the opening written down value on boat number 2, despite it being $1 million capital value, is in fact $600,000. Now if you think about that circumstance, you actually exacerbate your situation going forward. If you're looking to move out of your boat number 2 in 5 years' time or sell it, because you've started off with a $600,000 written down value on a $1 million asset and they're retaining 80% plus resale values, then by the time you get to the end of that 5 years, your written down value as a percentage of resale has significantly moved away from it. So your liability is high. So very clear to recognise that despite the fact that you might be delaying some of your tax payable, it is mounting at the end of the day. It is interesting to note that the two models meet very clearly.